Around 3,000 rockets have now been fired into Israel, with the daily casualties mounting in Gaza. To discuss this in more detail is our foreign affairs expert, Lisa Daftari, joining me once again from Los Angeles. Lisa, tensions are rising between the Palestinians and Israelis, and they're not easing anytime soon.
No, there are multiple calls internationally for a ceasefire, but right now things are escalating. Look, this is even when we see a stop to this, it's only going to be a lull. We're going to see this happen again in a few months, in a few years. It depends on the severity of it. It depends on how much of their weapons will be left in their depots of Hamas, a terror organization. This is an ongoing thing. I said on a show earlier today that we know about Israel from biblical times and we know about current times. So most people don't know the in between and the years of wars and these uprisings that Israel has to deal with day in and day out. So it's not going to end anytime soon, and it looks like things are getting worse for now.
And what caused the latest tensions? Did it have something to do with rent?
Yes, so I know it sounds crazy, right? 3,000 rockets because of a few families getting evicted because they weren't paying their rent. Well, to a sane person, when I tell you that the land belongs to these landlords who happen to be Israeli, the Supreme Court of Israel, that has both Arab and Israeli justices, decided years ago. These properties went to court many times. So years ago, they decided, yes, these do in fact belong to Israelis. They tried to evict these tenants, and the court said no. They actually sided with the Palestinians and said they can stay as long as they pay their rent. Well, guess who hasn't paid their rent for years? So they went back to court, and the court this time said, listen, you're not paying your rent, you get evicted, right? So any logical person would think that makes perfect sense. Well, Hamas has used this for pretense. And I say pretense because the world does not even know that this is the reason why this started. Many people are quoting, and this is the mainstream media's fault by and large. They're saying that Israel started attacking during Ramadan. They started attacking at the mosque. It started as, again, the pretense being that these families were going to be evicted, and rightfully so, because they were not paying their rent.
Now, Lisa, the Times of Israel is reporting that Hamas attempted to hit an offshore gas rig with rockets.
Yes, so they're trying to hit anything and everything they can. Hal, if you see the footage, not just of the rockets that are coming over into civilian areas, into the most populated city, which is Tel Aviv, it's like New York City. You see the barrage of missiles coming through, and of course, thankfully, the Iron Dome, which is the technology that Israel has to catch, it's like a big mitt to catch these missiles, is tremendous. But they're coming in at such warp speed, and of course, this is all strategically planned to hit the most damaging parts of Israel's infrastructure, whether it be civilian casualties or infrastructure damage. They want to do the most damage. What people don't talk about is when you look at the number of casualties on the Palestinian side, it's obviously larger than the Israeli side. We're looking at 181 to about 10 or 12 on the Israeli side. Well, many of those individuals were actually taken out by Hamas missiles on their own side. So they have no aim. They have no, they're hitting their own. They're taking out power lines. About 250,000 Palestinians were without
Wow.
electricity most of last week because of these missiles hitting power lines. So they're damaging their own infrastructure as well. And the bottom line is when you hate your enemy so much that you're willing to damage and kill your own people and your own cities and your own homes, then there's nothing that a ceasefire or the international community can do to intervene.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that nuclear talks with Iran will continue despite calls from Republican senators to halt negotiations in light of the Hamas rocket attacks on Israel.
Right, and let's connect the dots here. Why are many lawmakers calling on Blinken and Joe Biden to stop at the negotiating table with the Iranian regime? Well, those missiles that are going from Hamas into Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel literally have the Iranian regime stamp on them. The Iranian regime has boasted about this. Hamas has boasted about them, that Iran is its sponsor, just like they sponsor many other terror organizations, like the Houthis in Yemen, like Hezbollah in Lebanon, like the Basiji in Syria. So rightfully so, many of these lawmakers are saying, wait a minute, are we about to release billions of dollars to a regime that's going to pour money right back into terrorism? Why are we sitting at that table in Vienna? And of course, the Secretary of State Blinken said, We're going to go right back, and this is not going to affect or deter us from going forward with a deal with the Iranian regime.
Now, speaking of Secretary of State Blinken, he recently held talks with key counterpart influential in the Middle East as the U.S. is seeking to de-escalate clashes between Israel and Palestinians. Did he have any success?
You know, success in the Middle East is it's minimal, except for I would say the Abraham Accords. We haven't seen success in the Middle East for decades, right? Moving the needle forward on the Iran nuclear deal is, we saw a nuclear deal in 2015. What did it get us? I think what this administration is not understanding is that you have to use leverage in order to get something in return. And foreign policy is exactly about that, is looking at your interests and seeing how they can align with other people's interests around the world and coming to a consensus because of our shared interests. But this administration has done away with any leverage we had with regards to the terrorists, with regards to Afghanistan, with regards to Iran's regime. They came in, and the Iran's regime was in a good place in terms of where we wanted them, in terms of the global community, the Western world. We wanted them squeezed in terms of their economic status, in terms of their ability to pour money into their weapons program, pour money into their terror programs, and it was working. It was working. There was no way to do banking with the central bank. They had to come up with unique trading partners, and they were getting squeezed. In terms of the nuclear deal, we withdrew in 2018. We said we're not going to go back until things change, until we see significant behavioral changes. Those were the words of the Trump administration. But when Kamala Harris and Joe Biden ran their presidential campaign and they announced we will get back into a nuclear deal, it doesn't leave much leverage. It doesn't leave much guessing. So the Iranian regime, it's flexing its muscles. And of course, on the global stage, these talks that you ask about, they're not going to go anywhere anytime soon until the Iranian regime gets exactly what it wants.
Yeah, let's talk more about what's been taking place in Gaza City again, the Israelis, the Palestinians, Lisa. Not only do we want to see peace in the Middle East here in North America, but a UN envoy is also pushing for a ceasefire in Gaza. And the UN Security Council met to discuss some of the worst violence in that region since 2014.
Yes, so the UN has never been a helpful voice when it comes to Israel. They have always pointed fingers. They have always made Israel our biggest ally in the Middle East, the bad guy, while giving seats to, states like Saudi Arabia and Iran, seats to the Women's Council and the Equality Council and the Human Rights Council. It's just, it's a joke when it comes down to that. But they've gathered because they want to call on Israel to cease and have a ceasefire between the two. But nothing good will come out of this. There will be another, censuring of Israel. There will be another report about how there is, an unequal use of force. But at the end of the day, Hal, they aren't, speaking the truth. They're not talking about how this is a terror organization. Hamas is on the U.S. World Terror List. And when it provokes and provokes and provokes and it tries to amass civilian casualties to its neighbor, well, there will be a response and there will be a military response. But more than anything, this is not a military fight. This is a PR fight. And, Hamas is prepared to win at all costs.
One of the videos which has gone viral recently is showing the attack on one of these buildings here in Gaza. Israel shared intelligence with the United States showing how Hamas operated inside of that same building which was attacked as Al Jazeera and the Associated Press. Now, the same building which was attacked, Lisa.
Yes, and how it's ridiculous because the individuals in the building were asked to evacuate. They were given proper notice, and the AP is now calling for an investigation because they want to see evidence that Hamas was actually in the building, meaning the AP is actually taking the side of a terror organization rather than the evidence that was provided to the United States by Israel, and really just denying the fact that they were warned. This is on so many levels. This is so egregious, right? So a terror organization was working in the same building as the news sources, the mainstream news sources that we all trust to get our news out of the Middle East. I mean, this really puts a question mark on everything that we hear, all the reports that we are hearing. I know if you get on Twitter, it's just a joke. It's like color war, right? People are being so incredibly, there's no filter anymore. Just last night, a CNN contributor said it's time for another Hitler. He actually tweeted that. He has a blue check account, which means he's a verified Twitter user. He works for CNN. He has over, I don't know, 100, 200 columns on CNN.com and is frequently on air as a contributor. And this is what he's saying. Well, since then, CNN has announced that they will no longer be working with him, but just goes to show you what kinds of influence, what kind of propaganda, what kind of narratives are running through the mainstream media. And that is what's influencing, world opinion on, again, our biggest ally in the Middle East.
Yeah, Lisa, you're making reference to the writer Adil Raja, who's written, I think, 54 bylines now for the news organization for CNN. Even during the 2014 FIFA World Cup, he tweeted, "The only reason I'm supporting Germany in the finals was because Hitler was a German and he did good with those Jews." First of all, Hitler was Austrian, he wasn't German. And secondly, oy vey, I mean, come on. That must really hurt a lot of CNN's credibility. But the fact that this has been ongoing and they kept him on staff, that has to be really disconcerting and concerning.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, more than anything, it puts, this is like a needle in a haystack kind of thing. How many other people are posting this on Twitter? We try to retweet and try to put them on blast to bring some attention to it. But as you said, I mean, this anti-Jewish sentiment, it's really anti-Semitism. When people say, no, we're not against Jews, we're just against the policies of Israel. I mean, ask them, what are the policies of Israel that you're against exactly? And I bet you they won't be able to name those policies, right? I mean, this anti-Jewish sentiment has gone too far. It's spread across the world. I don't know if you got a chance to see some of the footage coming out of these pro-Palestinian or pro-Israel demonstrations that were hijacked. I know one of them was in Montreal. We had them here in Los Angeles. They're coming out of London, all over, where it's really scary to watch this anti-Semitism rear its ugly head once again.
Let's talk about what's happened closer to home here in Montreal. Police used tear gas over the weekend following the clashes between pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian protesters. Several hundred demonstrators draped in Israeli flags. Lisa, they gathered in the central Montreal square to express solidarity with the Jewish state, and a lot of people didn't appreciate their message.
Right. And, for the most part, all the footage that I've seen, I've been, accumulating the videos just to post them on Instagram. These are peaceful protests on the part of the pro-Israel side, and they are frequently hijacked by these pro-Palestinian demonstrators who come throwing rocks. One man they attempted to lynch a man in New York City. New York City. We're not talking about some far off place where no one has seen a Jew before. This is New York City. Same thing goes for the streets of London and, again, Los Angeles. They were chanting, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." That is not a regular chant. That chant is a genocidal chant. That means from the river to the sea, which means Israel is off the map. I mean, people have to understand the consequences of what's going on right now. This is much larger than anyone is reporting about. We're not seeing this in the mainstream media. We're just seeing it as a clash between two sides. But this has very deep repercussions, and I hope that people understand how grave this truly is.
Lisa, British police have arrested 4 people over videos posted on social media, speaking of videos, that appear to show violent anti-Semitic behavior and language being shouted from a convoy of vehicles driving right through London.
Yep, that's exactly right. That video went viral, one of many videos, but that in particular was just so symbolic of really the language, a lot of Hitler, lines about Hitler, a lot of lines about genocide, a lot of lines about ethnic cleansing coming out, and a lot of violence, again, throwing cement blocks and throwing, stones at peaceful protesters who are just out there, like you said, wearing flags or T-shirts or, really trying to be peaceful protesters that are met with this kind of violence. And it really deters. It makes people think twice before coming out. Here in Los Angeles, for example, on Saturday, we had thousands of people show up for a pro-Palestinian march, which was a very, 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 I would say, violent and loud, using profanity, again, signs with Hitler's name on it. And on Sunday, there was a pro-Israel demonstration in which a fraction of those numbers came out, even though I would say the population of Jews versus Palestinians or pro-Palestinians here in Los Angeles is probably the other way around. But I think people are fearful of coming out. It's violent, it's dangerous. They don't want to risk their lives just for, a peaceful protest. And unfortunately, it's come to that. It's very violent.
Now let's change gears for just a moment here, Lisa. The director of the Center for Disease Control is defending the decision to ease mask wearing guidance for vaccinated people. Rochelle Walensky says it has nothing to do with increased political pressure.
Yes, they went back on and forth on this quite a bit. So last week, Dr. Fauci came out and said, "Keep your masks on." And people are confused about this because we were told that once people become, or the majority of people become vaccinated, they can begin to take their masks off, especially outside. Then there was an about face, and they said you can take your masks off inside and outside. Okay, what's that based on? Well, they said they went back and reviewed the data, which said that, well, the majority of, if 90% of people have it, and those people won't be able, even if they're asymptomatic, they won't be able to spread it to people who are not vaccinated. Therefore, we can now take our masks off indoor and outdoor, except for Joe Biden. He will continue to wear his mask in a room alone on Zoom.
Our foreign affairs expert and U.S. correspondent, Lisa Daftari, thanks a lot for your time again today.
My pleasure.